Okay, so the movie I want to talk about is maybe one of the less well-known ones on this podcast, and it's called Red Road, set on what was a very famous housing estate outside Glasgow. I think when it was built in like the post-war period, it was like the tallest residential blocks in Europe, and this brave new utopia when we all had these lovely new concrete housing blocks, and then realised later that they weren't brilliantly well designed for humans to live in. And so I think they were demolished actually in 2015. So this is kind of like capturing a time in urban architecture for people who are geeky about it. But it was directed by a female director called Andrea Arnold. And this is her first feature film. She directed an Oscar-winning short called Wasp, which is really worth seeing, actually. And then she made this film, and it was made kind of on the Dogma style for people who are into that. It won the Cannes Jury Prize in 2006, which is kind of really unusual for a debut feature. Then it played London Film Festival, which is where I saw it, and it won the Sutherland Prize. So it's like really critically acclaimed. And it stars Kate Dickie as Jackie, who works as a CCTV operator on the estate. And she basically gets obsessed by this guy called Clyde, played by Tony Curran. And it's really unclear as we go through the movie whether Clyde is sinister or whether he's just a well-meaning guy. He's obviously come out of prison, and she's surprised to see him out of prison. And it's basically almost like a stalker drama. And then at some point, she's obviously on a vengeance mission, and she tries to frame him for sexual assault and then has a second thought. But it's just a movie about paranoia and surveillance and stalking in this very, I think, amazing, I mean, in some ways beautiful urban setting, although not many people would agree with me, with very strong performances and cinematography by Robbie Ryan. So I obviously love this film. For people who want to know what she went on to do, she went on to do films like Fish Tank, which is really good, Wuthering Heights, like a really interesting version of that, and then American Honey. So all very indie stuff, I would say, and is obviously influenced in this film by things like, I guess, Coppola's The Conversation, Michael Haneke's Caché, Lynn Ramsey's Ratcatcher. So it's very much in the sort of the indie film genre. So did you guys get to watch this film? And if so, what did you think?
So I did watch it yesterday, and I thought it was, I liked the mystery around it. Like, why is she so obsessed with not just, I've forgotten the name, but...
Clive.
Oh, Clive. Clyde, yeah. So not just him, but I noticed that she was also obsessed with, she kept following the guy with the dog.
Yes.
But I guess mainly it was Clyde and like why she was interested in him. I mean, you get hints throughout the movie, especially when she gets the phone call from the police, and then like how it all ties in, and then like her, relationship with her father-in-law. So eventually you find out and why, she tried to get to know Clyde, and then like her whole plan. But I did think that her U-turn where she decides to contact the police and say that she wanted to drop the charges, I thought that was a bit quick.
Yeah, lots of people at the time, that was the one thing people criticised, was the ending. And even, I kind of was okay with it the first time I watched it, but this time I was like, oh, okay. It would have probably been better if she'd gone through with it, and it just ended up really dark. So what would you give it overall, Glenn?
I would recommend the film. It's, it's really dark and quite interesting.
How about you, Jock? Did you get to watch it?
Yeah, I did. I kind of didn't like the ending. Like, I felt like it was quite irresponsible of her, and I felt uneasy throughout the whole thing. Like, I do think the protagonist was the villain, in my opinion. Like, it was more of an antagonist, and it opens up questions about, like, very strong questions at the time about CCTV and police involvement in that, and how much power they have. So I thought it was good from that respect.
I think you're absolutely right, Jock. I mean, I think it is one of these films where you're at the start you sympathise with her, but you're not sure by the end what to think of her. Like, her reaction seems so disproportionate.
Yeah.
And she is like this protagonist-antagonist. I mean, I think Clyde's actually quite sympathetic. And Kate Dickie's good at playing those sorts of roles, I think. I mean, it's worth saying for Vassals of Kingsbury people, this actress who was unknown at the time did go on to play Lysa Arryn in Game of Thrones.
Yeah.
Oh, she was also in The Pillars of the Earth.
Yes, I'd forgotten about that. Good point. But how do you feel about the way CCTV is depicted? I mean, I was quite shocked now, going back watching it, like the bit very early on where she thinks there's a girl who's maybe under attack and calls the police, but then it's just her boyfriend. And then she says false alarm. And I was like, wow, I mean, that's a lot of power, isn't it? And you're making all these sort of like micro judgments about whether someone's at risk or not. And I thought that was quite like the level of surveillance. Is that just because it's a council estate, or is that because, I mean, is that just what we have all through our lives? Because we're a very CCTV'd country, aren't we? And
yeah, we have 20% of the world's CCTV cameras.
Yeah, and more of it with facial recognition, right? Which is really scary.
Well, I thought it was just because of because it was that particular area, so like quite a rough area. So that's why they would have had staff involved. Of course, the CCTV security officers like that will be stationed throughout the UK, but I think there was like a big focus on that area because crime rates were quite high.
Yeah, in 2006, when the film was done, Glasgow was the murder capital of Europe.
Really? Like, legitimately? I always thought that was like a scare story told in anti-Scottish southern newspapers. Because it does capture, I think it tries to capture, although the story is itself quite outlandish, because it's shot in this dogma style, which is like handheld camera, it's very realistic. It is trying to capture a slice of social life in a way that, you know, Braveheart clearly isn't. But I think it is interesting as a bit of a time capsule, like of just how just a little slice of life in Scotland at this particular point.
You know, early on in the film, I was a bit shocked when I seen all the VHS tapes.
Oh yeah. And her little Nokia phone, when phones could literally only call people or just about send a text message. Yeah, it's another time, isn't it? It really is. But how do you guys feel about it? I mean, this is a Scottish movie roundtable. And I think what's interesting in all of these films is how they do or don't portray Scotland. How did you feel about this? I mean, she's not a Scottish director, interestingly. I think she's English. But obviously showcasing a lot of really good Scottish acting talent, people like Martin Compston and Tony Curran and Kate Dickie.
I did think that with, you know, a lot of movies that we've picked within this round table, a lot of the movies are like early movies. So a lot of the actors, crew that have worked on the films that we were talking about have gone on to more well-known stuff. So like you were saying, Martin Compston, you know, one of the biggest actors in the UK at the moment through Line of Duty.
Yeah. Oh, I was thinking of that particularly with Train Spotting, and you get that very young Kelly MacDonald, and Ewan McGregor looks so young, and you're just like all that talent that was hopping around at that time. I was thinking actually when I looked at these films that is there any such thing as a Scottish middle class and a Scottish middle class movie? Because the movies are either these sort of like epic Aristo movies like Braveheart, or they're sort of like depicting, I guess, in Train Spotting and certainly Red Road, like the lower end of the sort of economic spectrum. But there's not, you know, there's a very strong, and I hate this kind of genre of English middle class movie starring people like Judi Dench or Kristen Scott Thomas. My husband hates films like this. You know, things like Military Wives, like, you know, very, very sepia tinted and earnest and gentle. And does that exist in Scottish film? Maybe Duncan knows this.
I cannot think of one.
Yeah.
They tend to be really gritty, hard-hitting type stuff, and, you know, a lot of the Scottish films centre on like poverty, which is why I chose Sunshine on Leith, because it's a bit different.
That's it, right? That is the middle class it's into a movie. Oh, I have to say that film just really made me want to go and visit Edinburgh. It just looks gorgeous, doesn't it? And all the views, and it's never looked more beautiful. Yeah. Anything else to say about Red Road? Would you recommend it, Jock? You didn't give it a rating, I think, or did the ending kind of undermine it for you?
Well, I am a bit concerned about showing false rape allegations in the film, given how there they are in reality, how it could cause a disproportionate perception in the general public.
Oh, that's a really good point. Yeah, that is a really good point. I hadn't even thought of it in that respect. Yeah, that's a good point.
Just from a sociological point of view. So I think it was quite a strong character study, and the cinematography was pretty incredible, given it's a small indie film.
Yeah, Robbie Ryan's a phenomenal cinematographer, and he went on to photograph some phenomenal films. Maybe I wonder if that's why Andrea Arnold then made her withdraw the rape allegation at the end, and maybe did it too quickly to make it feel realistic, to kind of save herself from that criticism, because at the end she doesn't pursue it. But I do think it's interesting that all the films that we've chosen, maybe not Sunshine on Leith, but the other three, are in their own ways controversial. I mean, if you think this one, how far should you depict a false rape allegation when, that's a very abused false trope that people can throw around. And then Trainspotting, I remember at the time, got a lot of criticism for sort of glamorizing drugs. And when I was watching it, my husband and I were like, how could anyone think this glamorizes drugs? It looks absolutely horrific. But at the time it was. And I think it's because it had, I watched, this shows how old I am. Trainspotting came out my first year of university, and everyone had the soundtrack, which was awesome. And everyone had the poster on their wall. And it was like, I think that the dance music soundtrack was so good. And it's kind of weird because it disassociated itself from actually the really horrific stuff that's in the film. But that did get a lot of shit at the time.
I wasn't born.
Just make me feel old, Jock.
Make me feel old. Well, it's interesting you mentioned, for the listener out there, we had this very long conversation around people like Mel Gibson, who, have produced films like the Mad Max trilogy, starred in the Mad Max trilogy and all these really famous movies, Braveheart, and how, how we can view those films given what he later becomes involved in. And in fact, Kevin Guthrie within Sunshine on Leith actually was just sentenced and proved guilty of sexual assault yesterday.
No, really? I had no idea. Gosh.
I did know about it, but I didn't know. So I knew that he had been accused, but I didn't know until yesterday that the court case must have been very recently. It was in the newspapers that he was accused. Well, he was, proved guilty. Well, sentenced as guilty.
Wow. I mean, what I find about films, which I think makes them harder, is, like if it's a novel or an opera, because lots of people can't listen to Wagner because of his anti-Semitism. You can choose to sort of eliminate that from your life. But with films, there's so many people involved. So even if I didn't want to watch Braveheart because of Mel Gibson, and I do find him quite detestable, there's all the other actors giving amazing performances, there's the writers, there's the photography. And even in Sunshine on Leith, I think that it's just such an uplifting, gorgeous film. And then do I not watch it because this one guy got accused of sexual assault? Does it invalidate the other performances? I guess that's why Kevin Spacey was sort of like retroactively taken out of all the money in the world. But my view is probably on one end of the spectrum, whereby, especially with group creations like this, I'm quite okay with watching them. I find it okay to sort of dissociate myself from individual acts. I think it's more problematic almost in what Jock said about showing something that is unpalatable. So, for instance, Breakfast at Tiffany's, no one I think involved in that has got a track record that's horrible, but it has, Mickey Rooney, a white guy, playing Mr. Yunioshi, a Japanese guy in yellowface. I find that really, I wouldn't watch that. So to me, it's more about what's on screen than what's behind the lens or what's in the private life in a way, but maybe that's a weird way to look at it. I don't know.
I agree, but I'm also for putting pressure on studios and stuff to remove problematic characters and stuff once it's been proven, of course.
Retroactively taking people out? Yeah. Or at least putting guidance on things. I know Disney Plus has done that with a lot of films, right? They've said, just be careful before you watch this with kids. Maybe you want to discuss it with them. I think that's a really good way of handling it too. I thought The Doctor's Use Estate did a really good thing where they let a lot of his books down, but just took out those few that had problematic depictions in them.
Thanks, Bina. Sorry I couldn't join for that discussion, but I did watch Red Road on your recommendation, and I found it to be a riveting psychological thriller. I thought the visual storytelling and the naturalistic style and the way the film encourages you to participate in the spying and the stalking that the main character commits really, really interesting. I love the mystery of it. I love the fact that you didn't really understand what her motives were and whether what she was doing was good or bad. I think it really plays around with your perceptions and your expectations in really interesting ways. I thought the film did a great job of juxtaposing the main character's perception of the world through the surveillance cameras, where everything is really distant and cold, and then again the world up close when she's walking the streets and when everything suddenly becomes really overwhelming and dangerous. I think it shows how perception is everything. The world is completely different depending on whose eyes you're looking through. And even though the film was shot a decade ago, I thought there was really something really sort of apocalyptic about it, like the decaying buildings and the barren landscape and the constant surveillance of all the characters. Felt very much like the characters are trapped in this prison, this psychological prison. So I thought that was a really good film, which I'd never heard of. So I was glad